What if Abraham sacrificed Isaac? Picture a quiet mountain at dawn, wind picking at the edges of a simple altar, a father's hand trembling above a son he loves more than his own breath. In our world, a ram appears in the thicket and a voice says, "Stop." But what if that voice never came? What if the knife fell, the wood caught, and the silence around Mount Moriah was broken by the unthinkable? The world as we know it would not just tilt. It would turn into a different sky. Let's first remember what actually happened, in a way anyone can follow. In the book of Genesis, Abraham is called by God to leave his home, travel to a land he does not yet know, and trust. He's promised a son, a family beyond counting, and a blessing that will spread through the nations. That son, Isaac, finally arrives when Abraham and Sarah are old. So old it sounds like a joke that somehow came true. One day, Abraham hears a test he can barely understand. Take Isaac, go to the region of Moriah, and offer him there. It's a 3-day walk of heavy silence. They climb a hill. Isaac carries the wood. He asks, "Where's the lamb?" Abraham answers, "God will provide." Abraham builds an altar. He ties Isaac. He raises the knife. And then, interruption. An angel calls his name twice, the universal signal to stop immediately. Abraham looks up and sees a ram tangled by its horns. He frees his son and sacrifices the ram instead. The story lands with a blessing renewed, descendants as numerous as stars in sand, a promise reaffirmed, a path ahead. From Isaac comes Jacob, later named Israel, and from Jacob come 12 sons, the tribes that become a people. The story moves through famine and Egypt, through Moses and Sinai, through kings and prophets, through a cadence of exile and return. Out of that long arc, scriptures are written, worship is shaped, and the idea of one God, holy, merciful, just, echoes toward the wider world. For Christians, that line leads to Jesus, descended from Abraham through Isaac and David. For Muslims, Abraham is a friend of God, and the binding story, remembered in another tradition, points to supreme trust. In all these paths, the mountain becomes a symbol, a test that ends with mercy, a rejection of child sacrifice, and a covenant that continues through Isaac's spared life. Now, breathe deep and step into our alternate path. In this what if, the blade is not stopped. Isaac dies. The smoke rises, and the hillside feels like a door closing. What happens next? First, the immediate human world. Sarah. Her laughter at Isaac's birth becomes a wail you can hear down the valley. The home becomes a museum of absence. Neighbors whisper, some recoil. Others, in an ancient Near Eastern setting where child sacrifice did exist in pockets, might say, "Abraham is more devoted than we imagined." You can feel the danger here. The original story cuts against a culture that sometimes demanded blood. Our what if bends it in the other direction. Instead of a divine voice that ends sacrifice, a silence that might be misread as approval. What about the covenant itself? In the canonical story, the promise runs through Isaac. If Isaac's line ends, where does the promise go? There are several forks. One leads to Ishmael, Abraham's older son. According to the text, God blesses Ishmael too, promising him to become a great nation. In this alternate line, with Isaac gone, Abraham might look to Ishmael as heir. Another fork leads to Abraham's later children by Keturah, less celebrated but present. Yet another fork is adoption, perhaps the elevation of a trusted steward, as Abraham once feared he might do with Eliezer of Damascus. Each choice carries consequences not just for a family, but for the entire map of faith and history. Let's follow the Ishmael route, because it's the most consequential. If Ishmael becomes the heir of promise by necessity, the heart of the covenant moves south and east, drawn along caravan routes, through oases and trade towns. The cultural memory of monotheism, instead of crystallizing in the hill country of Canaan through Isaac, forms along desert roads and incense trails. The symbols shift. Instead of Jacob's tents and the 12 tribes of Israel, we see clans around desert wells, altars by date palms, and sacred stories carried not in a land-centered law, but in a traveling oral world shaped by wind and sand. That means no Jacob, no Israel, no 12 tribes. No Joseph to be sold into Egypt, to rise and save a region from famine. Without that crisis pulling a family into Egypt, no centuries of bondage to cry out against, no Exodus, no Sinai in the way we know it, no tablets chiseled in stone to be placed in a chest of acacia wood and gold. The Ten Commandments, those short, thunderous lines that would ring across civilizations, might not arrive in that form, in that place, at that time. Without an Israelite nation, Canaan's religious landscape grows differently. The moral sharpness of the prophetic tradition, the relentless voice against injustice, idolatry, and the sacrifice of children, does not take root in the same soil. Some of those ideas might still rise elsewhere. Morality is not a single seed in a single field, but the particular storm of poetry and law, lament and hope that we call the Hebrew Scriptures would look entirely different if they exist at all. The Psalms might never be sung. The notion of a weekly day of rest, Sabbath, may never reshape human time. The Jubilee year, with its radical rebalancing of debts and land, might remain a dream never named. And yet, monotheism does not vanish. Abraham's name still stands tall. Along Ishmael's line, the one God is taught around fires at night. The stories of creation, of flood, of a Most High who judges and rescues, travel with traders and shepherds instead of settling in a walled city with a temple. The holy place is not a mountain in Jerusalem, but the memory of a father who obeyed and a God who calls. Would this more nomadic monotheism spread sooner along trade networks? Possibly. Caravans move faster than kingdoms build. The ideas might ripple across Arabia to the Red Sea, up the Levantine coast, into Mesopotamia's markets, before any one empire can stamp them out. Meanwhile, in the highlands and coastlands of Canaan, other peoples fill the stage. Phoenicians hug the coastline, writing their simple alphabet, sending ships to Cyprus and beyond. Without a tight Israelite polity, Assyria and Babylon later find different targets. Their imperial stories still happen. But the sieges that came to define a people, the fall of Samaria, the destruction of Jerusalem, are replaced by other campaigns. The region's moral arguments tilt too. If Abraham's act on Moriah is remembered without the ram, it could be misused by neighboring cults that demanded children. Instead of hearing, God stopped the knife, they hear, the knife went through. Prophets in this world, if they rise, will have a harder climb to turn hearts away from blood. Move forward centuries. Without an Israelite kingdom, there is no David strumming a harp, no Solomon building a temple, no lineage to anchor messianic hope in a royal house. The idea of a Messiah may still form, a deep human longing for rescue and justice, but it won't rest on a promise to David, because there is no Davidic line. Now look toward the Mediterranean. Without Israel and its scriptures, the Greek world still blooms. Philosophy on the stoops, plays under open air, scholars mapping stars. But there's a missing conversation partner. No Septuagint translation of Hebrew writings into Greek. That mixed vocabulary, Hebrew prophets speaking in Greek words, never circulates in Alexandria's libraries. Early ethical monotheism doesn't tangle as quickly with Stoicism and Platonism. Ideas that, in our world, blended into a powerful moral river, might remain separate streams. Where does that leave Christianity? In our world, Christians see Jesus as a son of David, a son of Abraham through Isaac, the fulfillment of prophecies wrapped inside a particular story. Without that story, no Bethlehem star shines over a Davidic town. There may be a teacher somewhere in Galilee one day, but he is not shouted into history by a chorus of prophets behind him. The movement that became the church, spreading from Judea to the ends of the earth, doesn't rise in the same soil, likely doesn't rise at all in that form. Europe, without that movement, develops differently. No monasteries to preserve texts in turbulent times, no cathedrals shaping skylines, no Gregorian chant under cold stone. The legal and ethical systems influenced by biblical law and gospel compassion take other shapes, drawing more heavily from Roman law, Greek ethics, and later, other monotheisms that emerge. Speaking of other monotheisms, what about Islam? In our alternate path, with Ishmael as the inheritor of the covenant center, the spiritual gravity toward the Arabian Peninsula increases earlier. The eventual rise of a robust, scripture-rooted monotheism from that region, centuries later in our world, could accelerate, or at least find a clearer runway. The memory of Moriah, with Isaac's death, becomes a blazing marker in Ishmael's story, a costly obedience that reshaped the heavens. Practices that honor the mercy and oneness of God might formalize earlier, guided by teachers who trace their authority to Abraham directly. When empires like Rome and Persia look south, they meet an already unified spiritual vision, not a scattering of cults. The cultural negotiation between empire and faith plays out in a new timeline. Education changes too. Without the Hebrew Bible anchoring literacy among a people, the push to read sacred words shifts to other communities. The first mass reading campaigns might sprout not in synagogues but in desert trading towns. The idea of schools attached to places of worship still happens. Humans always organize around what they revere, but the where and the when move. Even the calendar feels different. No Passover that remembers an exodus from Egypt. No weekly Sabbath defined by Sinai's command. Rest days and fast days do exist everywhere, but they're tuned to other stories. Harvests, solstices, or new codes given in deserts far from Jerusalem. Art takes a different palette too. The subjects that would have filled paintings, songs, and carvings, David and Goliath, Moses and the sea, Isaiah's vision, are replaced by Abrahamic scenes remembered through Ishmael's eyes. Pilgrimage routes bend away from Judea. Mountain shrines and valley sanctuaries reassign meaning. And yet there's a paradox. Even in this alternate history, some of the deepest themes remain. A single holy God. A call to justice for the widow, the orphan, the stranger. Hospitality in a harsh land. The demand that kings remember they are not gods. These are not accidents of one nation's story. They are human truths illuminated in specific ways by different cultures. In our world, the story of Isaac's rescue sharpened and spread them. In this other world, the grief of Moriah would shape them through a different prism. Obedience carved in sorrow, mercy taught through survival, and a long, slow turn away from blood that would take generations to complete. Imagine the Roman Empire meeting this map. Instead of encountering an Israelite people with ancient writings and a budding church, Rome meets a caravan-born monotheism that's already confident, already organized, already sending teachers north. Debates on God's nature, on law and grace, on images and idolatry unfold differently. The conversion of emperors, if it happens, doesn't happen through a cross over a battlefield, but perhaps through treaties at desert borders and alliances with traders who can shut down the spice roads. The later medieval world? No crusades for the Holy Land as we know them, because that land is not the same kind of center. Conflicts still happen. Human beings are human, but the flags are different. The sermon's different. The song's different. What about science and scholarship? In our timeline, centers of learning passed like torches, from Athens to Rome, to Syriac scholars preserving texts, to monasteries copying, to Baghdad's House of Wisdom, and onward. In this what if, one of those torches, the early Christian monastic network, is dimmer or missing. That might slow certain pathways while accelerating others. The great translation movements might start earlier in the south and east, changing which Greek and Indian texts become central in the west. Zoom back to the hill. In the world we know, the binding of Isaac, Akedah to many, stands as a sign against child sacrifice and as a declaration that life is not ours to demand. God provides the ram. If that moment is inverted, cultures would need another way, another story, another law, another prophet, to ring the bell that says, no more. Maybe it comes through a desert teacher in Ishmael's line who insists, years later, that the Most High abhors bloodshed and that Abraham's grief was never meant to be repeated. Maybe a new vision turns a dagger aside in 1,000 households, and the lesson of Moriah is saved by mercy arriving late. Pause here with a personal image tucked inside a sweeping map. A father or a mother set down a burden they thought they had to carry. They hear a voice rise inside their conscience that says, "This is not what the Holy One wants." That turning is the hinge of history, whether on a mountain or in a home. In our timeline, the story on Moriah made that hinge visible. In this alternate one, the hinge still exists, just hidden longer, harder to find, but still there. This isn't about erasing anyone's faith. It's about seeing how delicate history can be, how one spared life can carry the weight of many lives to come, and how a story told well can shape the future of empires and the words we teach our children. Quick thought experiment for you. In this alternate map, Who do you think carries the torch of ethical monotheism most powerfully? Abraham's line through Ishmael, a mysterious priesthood like Melchizedek's, or a people we haven't mentioned yet? Share your take below, and if you enjoy thoughtful, respectful what-ifs, join our channel so you don't miss the next journey. Now, a final turn toward reflection. The original story ends not with a scream, but with a ram, a son untied, and a father who learns that trust is not the same as tragedy. In our what-if, we push through the hardest door to see what else could have been built. And what we find, in all the alternate scaffolding, is this: mercy matters. The refusal of blood becomes the foundation for law, song, and conscience. When a community draws a line and says, "We don't do this," it doesn't just protect one child, it changes the shape of the next 1,000 years. Think of how many times the arc of history has depended on someone laying down a knife, literal or symbolic. A leader chooses not to retaliate. A parent breaks a family pattern. A nation decides to defend the small instead of crown the strong. Stories like Moriah's teach us that these choices are not just private, they are public architecture. And so we come back down the mountain into ordinary time, grateful for the version we inherited. A ram rustles in the thicket. A father lowers his hand. A son stands, blinking in the morning light. From that mercy, a people walks forward. From that people, books are written, songs are sung, and ideas, big, bright, demanding, travel farther than any caravan. Our what-if shows how different everything might have become. Our real story reminds us why mercy, once chosen, can still change the world.